In early fall, I got really serious about trying to reduce my number of read but not reviewed books. Let me know what you think of this series of videos where I sit at my neighborhood bar and talk about the books I've read. Enjoy! Everyone, welcome back to ONYX Pages camera. Yes, I hope I'm looking at the right spot. I am at my neighborhood bar. It is called the Famous Last Words in the city of Toronto, the West End, and I'm having a drink. It is a turmeric. I feel like it's a turmeric and tequila based drink. And it's spiritual. It's spirit forward. But I thought what I would do is take the time that I'm spending outside just to talk a little bit about some of the books that I have read in the past but have not reviewed. As you know, I asked you to help me figure out how to tackle my stack of read but not reviewed books. So I'm gonna do that right now, and I have a bunch of books that I'm going to talk about. So the first one that I'm gonna review is the Ballad of Beta 2, written by Samuel R. Delany, and this is a novella. I believe this was published in 1965. If you follow my Friday Read series, then you would have seen me reading this last month. I believe I read this in August. So here we're following, this is a space opera. I read it for Space Opera September. And here we're following an anthropology student named Delany. Delany lives in a future world, at least as future as it could have been in 1965. In this moment, he has been assigned to visit the wreckage of a ship to find out what exactly happened. So basically, at some point, maybe 50 years or 50 to 100 years prior to his assignment, there were a bunch of ships, a fleet of ships that went out, and there were two that kind of disappeared, and they weren't sure what happened to them. And there was a wreckage site off in the galaxy somewhere that had been sort of explored, but nothing was really found. And so he was a little bit irritated that he had to go out to the same place to figure out what happened. But his professor / boss said, "Look, I said you have to go," so he ends up going. And so in this novella, we actually follow him as he does some initial research in the library to find out, really how much was learned about this particular ship and the people on that ship, and then to actually go to the wreckage to see if he could find out what actually happened and what the story was. So I'll say, just to give you a sense of how I felt about the book before I get into the seven calorie shell review. I enjoyed it. It was a very easy read. Samuel Delany is an exquisite writer. I'm trying to read through all of his works, struggling a little bit with Dahlgren, but really enjoying his shorter novels. So it was easy to read. The writing was really poignant in parts. His ability to describe things without directly describing them was really interesting. You know how some writers assume that the reader is intelligent? I feel as though Samuel Delany is like that. That Chip assumes that the person who's reading has some intellect, and so he doesn't hand everything to you on a platter. He allows you to make connections, and he allows himself to be poetic in his writing and to be kind of cutesy from time to time. And I certainly found that he was like that. And if I can find a passage, then I'll read it to you. But basically, the mystery in this book is what happened to what happened to Beta 2, and like, was there, like, did it explode? Did the people disappear? Was there some element of combat? Was there an alien abduction? Like, what actually happened? And I'll just show you the cover, because the cover kind of tells you that we're gonna see that something strange happened. I mean, the back of the book says that his search for an answer led him on a course of indescribable terror and to a miraculous understanding. So, I mean, something happened to Beta 2. That is not necessarily a spoiler. So just flipping through the plot a little bit, some cool things that I flagged. So the way that I annotated my read was that I used these colored tabs as I went through the story, and I also made notes in pencil on the bottom as well, just to get a sense of, you know, what I wanted to talk to you about. So I'm just going to flip through and see if there's anything unique that I want to tell you. Okay. All right. So one of the interesting features about this story is the actual ballad. So one of the in this world, every time like a ship went out to do some exploring, it would come back, or if it didn't come back, it would send back art, whether it's poetry or music or whatnot. And in the archives, Delany found a ballad, and this ballad was kind of hard to explain. It wasn't clear whether the ballad ought to be taken literally, whether it ought to be taken figuratively or metaphorically. And I'll just give you an example of one verse. Then came one to the city over sand, with her bright hair wild, with her eyes coal black and her feet sole sore, and under her arms a green-eyed child. So there's this ballad that he finds very early on, that he reads, that he's trying to sort of understand, to see if there's some meaning in the ballad that can tell him what happened. So needless to say, Delany goes off, and he ends up on Beta 2, and he discovers things that give him a very clear sense of what happened. And so I'll just leave it there, because to tell you what or who he encounters will really be a spoiler that I don't want to do, because really that is the crux of the story. So I'll just go through the 7 cowrie shells. So first, in terms of world building, I mean, I would describe this, it's obviously a space opera. It's hard science fiction, meaning that you've got spaceships and plasma walls and gravity doing strange things, beings that are hard to explain. And of course, it's Samuel Delany, so you have black people in space, you have women in space and in positions of leadership, which was, I think, novel in 1965. And so you've got a sort of multicultural cast of humanoids and others in space. So that's pretty cool. So the world building, I thought it was really accessible, but it was also fun, right? Like it did feel different. And frankly, reading this in 2020, I still felt that I was reading about outer space. Like, I mean, the things that he was imagining at the time, they still haven't actually happened. So we aren't doing, we aren't going to different planets, and we don't have, we don't have systems like an Apple Watch that will allow you to speak to somebody on a different planet. So it still did feel futuristic, even though it was written in 1965. So I think I would give a full cowrie shell to the world building. In terms of characters, I also think that Samuel Delany, and I felt this when I read the Babel 17, Babel 19, Babel something. When I read that novella, I'll put it over here somewhere. When I read that novella, I also felt as though his characters are very interesting, that he turns his mind to taking up issues of class and race and size and age and sexuality and religion. He takes up all of those identity markers in his characters, and so in this society that that Delany goes and explores, there's definitely a complex political structure. There's definitely a funky religion that's followed. There are the haves and the have-nots. And there are divisions around sex and gender and race, and I thought that was really great because, of course, it's not as though star travel is going to change the social hierarchies that exist in our own world, and so why wouldn't you deal with that also when you're in space? So I thought that his characters were quite diverse, and not only were they diverse in identity, he also used the diversity of his characters to comment on power systems and to laugh at them, to laugh at their uselessness and arbitrariness and their futility. So I would give a full cowrie shell for characters. In terms of the point of view, so here I'm really curious about, and I want to comment on the point of view from which the story was told, and what that point of view allowed the story to do, whether there were limits, and I do actually think that there were limits. So the main point of view in this story is that of Delany. So the narrator is, I think it's an omnipotent narrator. Yeah, it's an omnipotent narrator. So it's written in the, I think it would be the third person omnipotent. I'll clarify that. But basically, the narrator knows everything about all of the characters inside their minds and what they're feeling, and is describing them to us, which I think is third person omnipotent, I think, or omniscient maybe. And so, I mean, at the same time, though, the point of view that we're hearing the story narrated from is Delany's, and Delany is male, a very successful archaeology student, I think privileged, and so I think Delany doesn't quite pick up on certain things that he sees, the questions that he asks. Like, there's a point where he encounters. There's a point where he could pretend, like, how do I describe this? There's a point in the plot where he is introduced to a group of people, and it doesn't occur to him that he might not be welcome, or that it's not really okay for him to just turn up and ask questions. And I think that is the kind of perspective of, the privileged archaeologist, the anthropologist who has no critical sense of anything. And I think it would have been more interesting if the main character, Delany, was non-binary or female, or not like the top of the class, right? I think we would have gotten a little bit more humility, a little bit more introspection, and we certainly didn't get that. So that was less than ideal, and I do think that there were some other characters that we could have heard more from, and didn't. Most of the voices were male, which I think is characteristic of science fiction written in the 60s. Even though there were female characters, we didn't get a lot from them in terms of their own perspectives. What would it have been like to be a white female captain of a ship imagined in the 1960s? That would have been really interesting, and we didn't get that point of view. So I would give probably a half a cowrie shell for point of view, because I think there were some really important things that we learned through Delany's eyes. But I think we could have learned a lot more. I think that a female character, a non-binary character, certainly would have asked different kinds of questions and would have picked up on cues and perhaps would have had a different sense of morality and ethics when exploring this new world. And I'm going to talk about relevance. And I think this is where the story really shines, because here, the questions here that were taken up in this story were things like, how much does it matter? How much does it matter that there's a world out there, there's a ship out there that left 100 years ago that didn't come back, that we haven't heard anything from. You know, society obviously progressed in that 100 years that ship was gone. So does it really matter what it found? Does it really matter what happened to the people? I mean, what do we do? What do we do with that? And I think that's a really relevant question, because ultimately, once we get to a point as a society where we have, you know, actual space travel, then, you know, things here on Earth are going to progress, and those who leave, those generation ships that leave, if we ever get to that point, when they're going to leave with a certain sense of how society ought to be organized, and how important will it be for us to keep in contact with them, given that society here on the ground is moving forward. And I think that was an important question. I think it's a relevant question, and certainly it was an important question for Delany to be asking in the 1960s, as much as I think it's still an important question to ask right now. So I think that question was relevant. The other relevant question was, how do we deal with what actually is the point of exploration? So in this story, the reason why all of these ships went out to go explore was because they felt that they were the most privileged of human society, and that they deserved the right to go and see what was going on amongst the stars, to engage with alien life. It's a very sort of lofty, privileged ideal, and I think that idea of space travel for leisure, for art, for exploration, is really something that we ought to question, I think. Why do we want to know what's out there? And how do our motivations for space travel impact life on Earth, impact our perception of ourselves, and impact how we evolve as beings, right? So I think those are very relevant questions that this story asks. So I would give a full cowrie shell for that. Another relevant question that the story caused me to ask was, what are my expectations of science, right? Do I think that science can, in and of itself, cure oppression, right? And obviously, I think that the answer to that question is no. But I certainly think that this story caused me to look at that. All right. The next cowrie shell is it's about options, and here I'm looking at what the big mystery is that the main character is dealing with, and whether they have options and pathways that they could potentially take. And here we're really following Delany, and the question that Delany faces is, you know, how far is Delany going to go to discover what actually happened? And then once he finds out what happened, what is he going to do with that information? And really, I don't feel as though this novel took up that question, because it actually ends before we see what Delany does with what he's learned. We just get an answer to the question, what happened on Beta 2, but we don't really find out like what he does with it. So, and frankly, he actually still has a few questions at the end. So I don't know that this is a story that really complicates Delany's perspective. Delany is simply a spectator learning things as they are revealed to him, and just sitting with that information. So that was less than satisfying, because I do think that the story came to an abrupt end of sorts, and rather than it being about Jonani's path and Jonani's journey of his own self-discovery, which I think would have been really interesting, the story really focused on the Ballad of Beta 2 and what was the Ballad and what happened to Beta 2. And the last cowrie shell, wait, what have I talked about? I've talked about world building, I've talked about characters, I've talked about options, relevance, point of view. There was one more I'm supposed to talk about, and then there was the overall reading experience. So I will talk about the overall reading experience because I forgot the other one for now. So in terms of the overall reading experience, I would give a full cowrie shell for that, because I really enjoyed reading the Ballad of Beta 2. I read it really quickly. I don't know that I listened to it as well on Audible, but I had a great time. It was a perfect length. It was fun. I found myself laughing a lot because Delany's writing is very sarcastic and like highbrow witty, and I really enjoyed that, so that was really cool. And there was some weirdness. There was some really sort of visceral, strange, literary vertigo type moments that I experienced while reading it. So I really enjoyed that. I think the only downside was as I said, the abrupt ending, but it didn't really take away from the overall reading experience. So I think I will end there. If you have read the Ballad of Beta 2, please let me know what you thought of it and whether... Yeah, sure. You did.
Could I grab that?
Yeah. It's in Njeri, Njeri.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. So I think I would say that's about it. So that is my review of the Ballad of Beta 2 by Samuel Delany. Between the distant stars lay terror. So yes, I would recommend this if you want to read space operas, if you want to get into Samuel Delany, but you don't want to read a tome just yet. I would say this is full of adventure. It's fun. It's not as like intense as Babel 17 or Babel 19. What is it? What's the number? A lot of his books have numbers. I think it's Babel 17 or 19. Babel. Yeah, one of the Babels. Anyway. It's good, so you should read it. If you have watched this all the way to the end, then I would love for you to put a planet. If you could put a planet in the comments and let me know if you think you might pick up this book, or if you've read other works by Samuel Delany, what did you think of them? I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts. So remember, always read with purpose. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.